Welcome back to the FORTitude desk, folks. In studio with us today is Mr. Eric Lee, director of the 4th Kimbell Art Museum. Before that, let's thank our Mr. Mark Stone with the Info Group for his awesome help with our podcast.
Yep.
And another large gentleman named Jay Fitzgerald, who handles all the audio video for us as well. Thanks, Jay. For very much. Last week's guest, Grace Collins, she's a forward for the TCU soccer girls team. She was influential in the 2-1 victory over Texas A&M on this past Sunday. So great job, Grace Collins.
Yep.
Is it because she was on the show, Brinton?
I think so. I think everybody who's been on the show has had winning seasons of some sort.
Or great successes.
I know that our guest this time around will acquire even bigger and better art than ever before.
We have a feeling some big acquisition might follow this show.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes.
But you had an unusual insight to some comments from last time, the fishing shirt comment.
Yep, we've received a lot. And some men have actually reached out to me and taken offense to it. And then it brings me into another question that I have for you, being an elite athlete like yourself.
I don't know who told you that, but continue.
A lot of the friends that I know, they consider mowing the lawn a workout of some sorts. And I know that you did a lot of working out when you played football. Would you consider that a workout? Is mowing on a hot August day a workout?
I would not consider it a workout, but as my watch tells me, a goal is a goal. So if I reach my goal, I think I've done something.
Steps only, or mine does like a deal where it measures me as doing some type of exercise where my upper body's not moving at all.
Well, this goes off, I think, sometimes when I'm sleeping or when I'm sitting on my chair. So I don't know what it's actually measuring. But anyway, I would say, Eric, what do you think? Mowing the yard, exercise or no?
I don't know.
I bet that question's never been posed to you yet. So thank you for answering.
Well, that's we're always striving to help in men's fitness here. Mm-hmm. So let's get on to our very distinguished guest.
And before we jump in, Mr. Lee, the piece behind you might have noticed, is part of the FORTitude collection. It's the Soleil Levant by Mr. Monet. I think you're familiar. This piece was acquired back in the year, 2020 maybe. I can't disclose the price we paid for, but what are your thoughts on maybe the framing job?
Excellent framing. We need advice at the Kimbell for framing.
Or is Aaron Brothers places where you do look for the art? Or
occasionally, some of our greater works have come from there.
We'll stop humiliating you, because you definitely deserve it better than that. But first out of the gate, Mr. Eric Lee, he's the 4th director of the Kimbell Art Museum. He arrived there in 2009, so he's been there quite a bit of time now. He's a native of North Carolina. Can you tell us about your childhood growing up in North Carolina, what that was like?
Well, I'm from a small town in the eastern part of the state, and North Carolina is a lot like Fort Worth in many ways. And there's, I think, an affinity between the two places, and I feel very much at home in Fort Worth, having grown up in North Carolina.
What was the town you were born?
It got called Clinton.
Clinton. Okay, very good.
Small town in the eastern part of the state.
From there, Brinton, he went to a school. I think I always wished I could get in, but they never really wrote me too many notes. But a place called Yale. Have you heard of it?
I have.
I hear it's a really good school.
My grandfather went there. My grandfather was a whiff and poof there.
Oh, great.
In the singing group. Yep.
Do you sing?
I do not.
But he plays the pedal steel, Eric. We always have to mention that on the show. Yes. So you earned your BA, your MA, and your PhD in art history at Yale. Why did art become something you were passionate about? What triggered you to become a lover of art?
Well, when I started college, I did not intend to major in history of art, and I found myself taking art history courses, and 3 a semester. I just absolutely loved it. I had a passion for the subject, and I ended up majoring in it. And I didn't go straight to grad school. I decided to do something else entirely, and I worked on Capitol Hill for 2 years.
Okay.
For the Senate Intelligence Committee.
I saw that as well.
And
Could you tell us what that means?
Well, the Senate Intelligence Committee is the U.S. Senate Oversight Committee for the intelligence community. And I was interested in politics at the time and in intelligence and foreign affairs. And I was fortunate enough to get this job as a research assistant on the committee, a low-level position on the Intelligence Committee. But it was extremely interesting. And so many interesting things were going on
what types
in the
of
world
things
at that
were
time.
going on at that time?
The collapse of communism. Tiananmen Square took place at that time.
Wow.
And so there was a lot of many interesting things going on at that time.
That is great.
So I was there for 2 years, had a great experience, but I knew I wanted to go back to grad school to get a PhD with the idea of becoming a museum director. And so that's what I did.
Is there a piece of art in your life that you first off gave you that feeling that you're like, I want to be more involved in this world?
Well, my parents, when I was little, would take me to museums, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, and I just fell in love with that place.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I went to grad school, the museums at Yale, I love those museums, and they were both designed by Louis Kahn, who's the architect of the Kimbell, of course.
Oh.
And it was really those museums that gave me this real passion for not only art history, but Louis Kahn and his architecture. And when I was in grad school, people used to ask me what my dream job was. And I used to always say I wanted to be director of the Kimbell Art Museum.
Really?
And so when I actually got the job, and people couldn't believe it, because they remembered what I had said so many years before in grad school. So I feel very lucky to be here.
That is outstanding. Right before you got to the Kimbell, though, a few years you spent at the Taft Museum in Cincinnati.
Yes, I
did.
And
then the Oklahoma University, is it School Museum?
Yes, the Art Museum there.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was a period of several years?
I was there for about 9 years or so.
9 years, okay.
And it was a great experience. It was my first time living in this part of the country. And I had a great experience, and we were able to build a new building, and the museum grew a lot while I was there, and just had a great experience.
Very nice. And from there, obviously, the Kimbell comes calling. In 2009, you jumped at it. It's your dream job. That's actually fantastic. Your predecessor, Mr. Pillsbury, Edmund Pillsbury, did you know the man? I
did know the man. He was not my immediate predecessor. Timothy Potts was my immediate predecessor. And Ted, I knew Ted as well. Okay. And Ted died about a year after I started working at the Kimbell.
Very good.
In fact, exactly a year after I started work. So I knew him, and I know Timothy Potts, of
Surely.
course.
What was your first day on the job like at the Kimbell? You've achieved this incredible thing. What are you feeling, if you can recall that far back?
Well, I remember walking into that building and my office, and I have such respect for that building and the architecture. There was a silence almost being in that building. It was like a holy space, sort of. I felt like I couldn't raise my voice. I'm not one to raise my voice, period. But it's I had just an enormous respect for the job, for the building, for the museum, and the museum's position within the wider art world. I was elated to be there.
Surely. So the Kimbell Art Museum, Brinton, we have some interesting stats to share with our audience. Please chime in where appropriate, but you guys see roughly 300,000 on average people per year.
Depending on the exhibition, sometimes less, sometimes a bit more, depending on the exhibition.
How's that fare compared?
In COVID.
COVID for sure.
Compared to other museums, does that rank in the top 10 most visited, or where does that sit?
The museums in New York, museums in cities that have a huge tourist attendance, they're going to have many more people. So New York gets a tremendous number. The Met has millions of people.
Okay.
But the North Texas doesn't have the number of tourists that some other parts of the country get. So we're not going to have that kind of attendance. But we are happy with the attendance that we get because of the size of the museum. Unlike the Met, the Kimbell is fairly small in terms of square footage. And so we have about as many as the building can accommodate.
Okay.
One of the interesting things that I saw that we talked about, but the Kimbell, under your direction, you guys have about 1 or 2 maybe acquisitions a year on average. About right?
About right, yeah.
Besides the piece behind you that we're going to try to sell you here after the show, I know this is a very hard thing to do to capture these significant pieces in the art world. You're constantly looking, I assume. How do things find you? How do real opportunities find their way to your email inbox?
Well, Every acquisition has a different story. And sometimes we are approached by dealers. Sometimes we find works that are coming up for auction that dealers may have. And sometimes works of art come to the museum through the garage of the Kimbell, just showing up. I'm referring to this rediscovery of Bonington.
We'll get to that here in a bit, no doubt.
Or does sometimes it happen where there's a very, wealthy person who passes away, and then this rumor mill begins that, oh my gosh, this person had this collection or this particular piece, we should reach out. I would assume that that's way some of those happen.
All of the above, and then with some works like the Michelangelo, we knew about that because it was cleaned by Michael Gallagher, the head of paintings conservation at the Met, and he was a former Kimbell employee, and he told Claire Barry, our conservator, about it, and so that's how we sort of got the inside.
So your work at the Intelligence Committee has paid off in the art
exactly.
world. Then.
Indeed. I bet there's a lot of work behind the scenes.
And then also I want to say, we a couple of years ago, we were given a Modigliani sculpture, which was an extremely important and very, very rare sculpture. And that was in a private collection, Gwen Wiener's collection. And she had lived in Fort Worth with her family growing up, and then she decided that she wanted to give it to the Kimbell, and it was one of the most important gifts the Kimbell has ever received. So,
wow. Not to make a light of that, but we have to. I'm just curious, when NHL team wins the Stanley Cup, they each get a night with the Stanley Cup at home, and they do take it around. Do you get time to? I know you don't take it home, but do you get a time to say, "Oh my gosh, I'm sitting here with this piece," and that's got to be an amazing feeling.
Well, when you have it in the conservation lab, it really is, when you could really get up close, and it is a wonderful feeling.
Right.
Absolutely. Or when you're looking at a painting under a microscope or something like that, or when our conservator is cleaning the painting and you see it in strip state, and it's really great.
For sure. So the Kimbell Museum, you showcase art, European, African, Asian, basically everything except American art and contemporary art, correct?
Yes, and we do not show those because of the Amon Carter for American art, and then the Fort Worth Modern for contemporary art. So
you're very good about acknowledging those two, because I've heard you speak several times before, and you're really nice about mentioning those. You guys work in conjunction.
Great museums, absolutely.
Sure.
Can I ask a question? What would you say, coming from your background and the job that you have, what is the primary purpose of art in society? I think that oftentimes, art gets maybe a bad rap from some, and then not as much accolades as it should. So what would you say that the reason, the primary reason, and the collection of it? And
sure. Well, I don't want to sound hokey, but I really do think that art is like the soul of society. Mm-hmm. And through art, we get to know what it is to be human, what it is to live in the world we live in. It's also a way of connecting with past former civilizations. I mean, at the Kimbell, you can look at ancient Egyptian works, ancient Assyrian works, and we can connect to them through the art. And
Oh, that was actually a beautiful explanation of that. That's fantastic. So the Kimbell was opened in 1972.
Yes.
Louis Kahn, who you mentioned, designed the building. Kay and Velma Kimbell, the two initial benefactors for the museum.
Absolutely.
Their pieces still exist in plethora at the museum. These people are no longer with us now, but then here comes Renzo Piano, another architect, helps you design the pavilion area, correct?
Yes.
It was built not too many years ago. That was a big undertaking, to put it mildly. Could you speak a little bit about the architecture? And I've read stories about how difficult it was to build the initial museum architecturally. Is there a story there you can share with us?
Sure. The Renzo Piano building, focus on that.
I think the Louis Kahn and the Renzo, but maybe it started.
Well, yes, you're right. The Louis Kahn building is coming up on its 50th anniversary in October of 2022. And when that building opened, the building was recognized as one of the greatest museum buildings ever built. And I know as it was going up, I hear people in Fort Worth still to this day, some people say they remember when it was going up, they question whether it would even stand up with these unusual vaults, et cetera. And but then when it opened, it was almost immediately hailed as this masterpiece. And I remember a story that Ben Fortson and his wife Kay Fortson have led the Kimbell. Kay Fortson was Kay Kimbell's niece.
Okay.
And she was president of the Kimbell board from 1975 until 2017. She's currently chairman, and their daughter is now president. Well, Ben Fortson, I've heard him say many times that when he walked through the front doors, when they finally finished the building, he said, "Yeah, I think this is going to be okay." Mm-hmm. And I think everyone had been a little concerned. It was a leap of faith to trust Louis Kahn to that this really would work because it was so unusual structurally. And you know, one of the greatest works of art, the largest work of art that the Kimbell has is certainly the building.
Is that common for most museums or not really?
Well, very few museum buildings actually rise to that level. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, I do believe the Kimbell is the greatest museum building that's ever been built. I mean, there are other buildings like the Guggenheim in New York. Yes, that is an absolutely great building, but you know, it may not be so great for exhibiting works of art. Mm-hmm. One great thing about the Kimbell is it's not only a great building in and of itself, but it's a great building to show art in. The light is absolutely spectacular. The scale is just perfect for it. With the Guggenheim in New York, Frank Lloyd Wright's building almost overwhelms the art. Though I will say I've seen some installations in the Guggenheim that look absolutely fantastic, that work very well with that building.
So that's a really big part of it too, is the installation within the building, how all that aesthetic is.
Yes,
like that
and
too.
at the Kimbell, the art really completes the building. And it gives scale to the walls. Mm-hmm. And though I have seen the building with nothing in it when we were redoing the floors, and it's so beautiful, that building. We thought about just opening the building empty just so people could see it.
That'd be cool. Yeah.
And the Kimbell operates on a $12 million a year, more or less budget.
A little more than that.
So that's
16 or so.
And it's funded primarily through the Kimbell Foundation.
Yes, the Kimbell Art Foundation.
Correct.
It's unusual as far as art museums go, that it's a foundation. So the Kimbell Art Museum is owned and operated by the Kimbell Art Foundation.
Oh, wow. This may be a question you can't answer, but I have to ask anyway. And if you can't, you won't answer it. But the insurance required for a museum of this size and the value of the art inside, are these things you can tell us about? Because I'm sure it's a very large number, but
it's considerable. Yes.
And you're insuring against theft, damage, all the things that could happen to a piece of art. How do you insure a Monet piece? Is that there is a price to do that?
Yes, we have regular valuations done on the collection, and we keep up with these valuations, the current prices, and then we work with our insurers to make sure that they are insured to the extent that they should be insured. And we have to insure not only our collection, but also works of art on loan for these exhibitions that we do. And I will say also, there's this great program that the government has in which the government indemnifies exhibitions in museums. We have to apply for this, but it saves the Kimbell and other museums millions of dollars. And there's very little cost to the government, and unless there's a major loss. But knock on wood, we haven't had any major loss like that.
I was about to ask if there was a claim yet. So
no,
have you ever had?
Knock on wood.
What was the movie with Pierce Brosnan and that lady, and she was the insurance?
Oh, right.
I remember it was I think there was a remake.
Yes,
it's. I cannot think of the name of it, but
I know what you're talking about.
that doesn't happen.
Right. So the dumb
people dropping from the roof with smoke in the gallery.
But you have the intelligence committee background, so it can probably be handled.
Have you ever had a attempted theft of a piece? Is that something you can tell us?
Knock on wood, we have not.
Incredible.
At my former museum, there was a theft 20 years or so before I arrived, and but they got the works back.
Oh, good.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that covers the Kimbell section. The last question before we have a little presentation for you is the exhibits you've pulled in through the years. One particular we saw most recently, a few years back, but the Monet late years exhibit was phenomenal. We visited actually 4 or 5 times.
It was an amazing show.
I can't even imagine how that happens, but is there a way that you pull that to the Kimbell and make that a reality for the city of Fort Worth? Is there more story to it than that?
The Kimbell is able to have great exhibitions in part because we have a great collection. And to be able to borrow works of art, you need to be able to lend works of art. And so our collection, though small, is in great demand for loans at other museums. So at any given time, we have works literally all over the world in exhibitions. Things have slowed down a bit recently with COVID, but the Kimbell also has a reputation for having these great exhibitions, and so other museums are willing to lend to us. With the late Monet show, we owe so much to George Shackelford, our deputy director. He is one of the leading experts in the world on Impressionist art, and so people were. Other museums were more than happy to lend not only to the Kimbell, but also to George's exhibition. And I had other museum directors come to town, and they were just amazed that we got some of the loans that we got for that show. It was absolutely spectacular. It's one of my favorite exhibitions since I've been at the Kimbell.
I'd say you nailed it.
What does that bartering look like? I'll give you one Monet for 2 Rembrandt. How does that
sometimes
work?
It works exactly like
Seriously?
that. At other times, someone will lend us an exhibition and they'll expect us to be generous with them in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, that's even happening right now with works that were on loan to the Monet exhibition. So
I can only imagine the paperwork.
There's no doubt.
Letting JW borrow something value of mine.
If we say no to a loan, another museum is less likely to lend to us in the future.
Or will they ask again? Or no? Is it typically?
Yes. I mean, sometimes we go back if there's an initial negative response. We sometimes do go back, depending on how important the loan is for us. But then also our exhibitions. If I say so myself, the exhibitions that the Kimbell does are among in my opinion, the best exhibitions in the world, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And there are very few museums in the United States that have the exhibition program that we have. And it really is amazing. Some of the shows that we have. So, as I said before, other museums and private collectors are more often than not more than willing to lend to us. And then some museums lend to us because they want to see how their paintings or sculptures will look in the Louis Kahn building or the Renzo Piano building for that matter.
Yeah. Interesting.
All right, Eric. So our crack research team and our FORTitude exhibit, or our FORTitude collection team put together a little presentation for you on the screen.
Okay.
We're going to run some pieces by you that we know you're familiar with. Hopefully you'll share a little bit of a story because each of them have one. So
we're going to just say, let's just do this for fun. See if you can guess the first piece we're about to show.
Michelangelo, Caravaggio, Poussin.
Nicolas Poussin, yes. So
okay.
Go ahead. I was going to give you the title Sacrament of the Ordination. Nicolas Poussin is a French painter, circa 1636 to 1640. So a few years ago.
You work at the Kimbell now? I thought we were going to let Eric describe
I'm trying to intro him with the piece so our listeners know who we're looking at.
Okay. So this painting shows Christ giving the keys to St. Peter with the 12 apostles. And then off to the left, you see the man reading a book. That's St. Paul, who wasn't one of the original 12, but would later go on to preach the gospel. And then they're standing in front of the River Jordan, and the figures in the grove of trees behind them are ancient philosophers, and they represent the old order that would give way to the new order. Now, of the New Testament. Now, this painting is part of a series of 7 paintings called the Seven Sacraments. And within European art history, this series was an absolute landmark series, very famous. And in the 18th century, they were among the best-known paintings in Rome. And the first time an export license was ever denied for cultural patrimony reasons was over this set of paintings. In the 1730s, Sir Robert Walpole, the British Prime Minister, tried to buy the paintings, and the Pope said they were too important to leave Rome. But then in the 1780s, the 4th Duke of Rutland was able to buy them, and the major painter, Sir Joshua Reynolds, negotiated the purchase, and they brought the paintings to London first, and then to Rutland's castle. That's in 1816, there was a fire there. One of them burned. One of them was sold in 1939, and it went to the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And then we were able to buy this from the current Duke of Rutland in 2011, I believe.
Under your direction, right?
Yes.
Did you know, Eric, that Poussin painted for Cardinal Richelieu
I did.
Louis the 13th?
14th? Well, actually 13th as well. Absolutely. So Poussin, he's one of the most important painters in the history of French art. And for hundreds of years, he had this enormous influence. You have painters like Jacques-Louis David and Ingres. Cézanne. Cézanne famously said that he wanted to redo Poussin after nature. And you wouldn't have, it's no exaggeration to say Picasso would look very different if not for Poussin.
Very nice.
Picasso was greatly influenced by Cézanne, who in turn was so greatly influenced by Poussin.
Very good. Well, we're going to grant you 1 point for that answer. That is the correct answer.
Thank you.
Do you see that lineage? Is there any kind of a map that shows those influences like that, whether it be by dotted line or straight line, like you just explained, where you could say, okay, Picasso influenced by so and so influenced by it's that's very fascinating.
We should do something like that.
Next on the
and also I want to say about this painting, it is an unbelievably great condition, absolutely pristine condition. It was painted, as you said, in the 1630s. And I saw this painting when it was in strip state in the conservation lab, and it looked practically as it does in the galleries today. We could have hung it in the galleries at that time. There was very, very little damage on this painting.
Well done. Next up.
Condition is important when we consider works of art to acquire.
Yes, sir. Next up. This piece is titled The Edge of a Forest with a Grain Field by, I believe it's probably Jacob van Ruysdael, a Dutch painter. Did I get Jacob right?
Yes, that's it.
Painted circa 1656. And I know this guy to be one of the greatest landscape painters maybe ever in history.
Absolutely. He was certainly the greatest 17th century Dutch landscape painter. Rembrandt also painted great landscapes, but landscape was Ruysdael's specialty. And he created a new type of landscape. He would look at ordinary nature, like this edge of a forest by a grain field, and he would make that ordinary landscape the subject of his paintings. But he would make that ordinary landscape. He would give it a grandeur and a poetry and making. In this particular painting, and there's almost a monumentality about the painting, yet it is an everyday, ordinary landscape. I mentioned the condition of the Poussin. The condition of this painting is extraordinary as well. When you're in the museum, look at the reflections on the water. And with the water lilies there, It's almost like a Monet water lily.
Indeed.
Hundreds of years later. But this approach to landscape was, like the Poussin, enormously influential. And so you have artists like Gainsborough in the 18th century was looking back at Ruysdael, and then Constable in the early 19th century was looking at, the ordinary landscapes that he grew up with, not landscapes that had historical associations or anything like that, just ordinary landscapes, but imbuing them with emotion. And of course, that approach also had an impact on the Impressionists later in the 19th century as well. And I also want to say the Ruysdael looks especially great above the lava lamp there. So
I was going to point that. I'm so glad you pointed that out. I was going to ask if you've ever presented or discussed art above a purple lava lamp like this.
I think this must be the first time.
I must tell you, Eric, our cameraman and audio video guy, Jay, he did tell me he believes he can paint this same painting. He felt very confident when he told me that today. So I just wanted to know you. We have an artist in the mix.
But Paint by Numbers was not out at this particular time.
Not quite yet.
But you did bring something up, and I want to just kind of jump in. You talked about initially how, so much of this art is the reflection of humanity. And you've now told us that this is an ordinary landscape that somebody enriched because of their almost like ability to extract emotion and put it on there.
Yes.
And so does that start this curve, or that's always been with art, or is that just the essence of art and just...
Well, I think great artists always put something of themselves in what they were painting, whether it's Michelangelo or Titian or any artist is going to do that if they're at a certain level. But what's unusual about this is that Ruysdael is taking such an ordinary nature, just an everyday, ordinary nature, and then he's imbuing it with this emotion. And then also in this case, a certain grandeur and monumentality. And that tree, the great oak there, it's almost like a person. Almost you could think of it in those terms. But the painting is also sort of a reminder of time. You see a fallen oak there, and so we know that the monumental oak that we see there in the future at some point will be fallen and dying as well.
Do you think the FORTitude logos help the painting or hurt?
Absolutely. And that oak shows fortitude.
Yeah. Beautiful.
We didn't know if it would be considered vandalism if we put a small fishing shirted individual here, but we just left it to the art world.
All right, next up for you, Eric. This guy's got a story, and we discussed this prior to the show, but this is the interior of Saint Ambrogio. Did I say that right?
San Ambrogio.
San Ambrogio by Richard Parkes Bonington, a British painter, circa 1826. And this one made some pretty good headlines here not too long ago. Before I get into that, did he die early, like
He died
26?
1 month shy of his 26th birthday.
So young guy. And this piece, though,
1828 he died.
One of your acquisitions as well. But recently, could you tell us the story?
Sure. This is one of the most unusual acquisitions. So Bonington is an extremely important painter, very influential, though he died very young. And because he died young, there are not many Boningtons around. And so he's a very rare artist.
Making him more valuable?
Well, sure, because there's so few of them.
Yeah.
And they very rarely come on the market. And then there are certain collectors who would buy almost every Bonington that would come on the market, including Paul Mellon, for instance. And the Yale Center for British Art actually has a large collection of Boningtons because the museum was founded by Paul Mellon, and he bought almost every Bonington he could get his hands on. So Bonington is an artist. I've always loved his work, and as I said before, a very rare artist. And then the most amazing story happened. We actually bought another Bonington in 2009, so I was thrilled with that painting. And then a few years ago, I got a call from Max Schaefer.
Yes.
And he said that he had a collection that he wanted to show me. And I said, well, bring it by the Kimbell and we'll take a look at it. It was a hot June day, so I said park in the garage because I wanted to keep everything out of the sunlight. And so he arrives. On my way out to the garage, I asked George Shackelford, our deputy director, to come with me to take a look at the collection. And Max started pulling things out of the truck, and we were admiring what he had. And then he pulled this beautiful little church interior that was signed at the time by this 19th century Scottish artist named David Roberts. And George and I admired the painting. And Mac put everything back in the truck and left. And George and I both actually took photographs of the Roberts, though, with our iPhone. I still have that photograph taken in the garage of the Kimbell. And anyway, a few days later, George was doing a Google image search for Bonington watercolors, and it was for a completely unrelated reason. And then lo and behold, he sees in the Wallace collection in London a studio watercolor that was clearly based on the oil sketch that we had just seen in the garage of the Kimbell a few days before. Now, a studio watercolor means that it was painted in the studio based on a sketch painted elsewhere. And so what we did, we got a catalog of Bonington's works that had been published just a couple of years earlier, written by Patrick Noon, the leading Bonington expert. And in the catalog entry for the watercolor, Patrick had written that it was based on an untraced oil sketch painted April 11th, 1826 in Milan. And we know about that oil sketch because Bonington's traveling companion in Italy wrote home to his parents in Paris that Bonington had painted this painting inside the church, and it was the first painting that Bonington made on his first and only trip to Italy. So we call Max Schaefer and have him bring the painting back over, and I call Patrick Noon, and Patrick starts asking questions. Well, why is it painted on? Is it something called a Davies mill board, the support that it was painted on? And yes, it actually was. He said, does it have a sticker on the back? The sticker had been removed, but you could see the shadow where the sticker had been. I send Patrick photographs of it, infrared images that we had taken in our conservation lab. And Patrick says he's almost sure it's Bonington. And then he actually comes to the Kimbell and he says, there's absolutely no question. This is certainly this untraced oil sketch. And of all artists, Bonington being so incredibly rare, it just, the odds of this happening were so slim. And also the odds of George doing this Google image search just a couple of days, probably 2 days after we had seen this in the garage of the Kimbell.
How did you make the discovery to confirm your thoughts? How did you clean the piece?
Well, I mean, it was confirmed by Patrick Noon.
Okay. But it had this other guy, David Roberts.
What was the deal with the other name?
David Roberts.
Oh, David Roberts. So everyone asked, well, what about David Roberts? Well, that was a fake signature, and it's incredibly ironic because David Roberts has always been less valuable than Bonington. So a fake David Roberts signature was painted on an authentic Bonington. And we know the whole entire early history of the painting. Bonington never signed these oil sketches. And when he died, the contents of his studio was sold. And we know the early history. It was sold at auction in 1835 and bought by William Beckford, this major, probably the most important collector in Britain at the time. 20-some paintings in the National Gallery in London were owned by William Beckford. And then he dies in the late 1840s. And it took 7 days, I believe, to auction off his collection. And I think that the identity with Bonington was lost at that time because it's an atypical subject for Bonington. Bonington is better known for views of Venice, like that other oil sketch in the Kimbell, or for coastal scenes. And this being a church interior, the subject is a bit atypical. So I think the identification with Bonington was lost at that time. And then a dishonest dealer, probably in the late 19th or early 20th century, got the painting, didn't know who painted it. And he knew that David Roberts, in addition to views of the Middle East, also painted quite a few church interiors. And he wanted to attach a name to it because a painting with a known artist is more valuable than one that's anonymous, usually. And so he had a signature forged on it.
I think that when we air this video, we need to put the price tag symbol just building up on each time, because each one of these things you say, it's just like more rare, more rare, more rare.
Well,
like
I know this one. This was a Star Telegram front page story when you guys discovered this from Mac. It was a $600,000 purchase. I believe that was about right.
We don't talk about
we don't talk money, but that was I have heard that from good sources. But anyway, it's a phenomenal story. So yes,
we had to. This is what's going to happen when we replay.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Next up, this is one that's very familiar to most people. Weeping Willow by a guy by the name of Claude Monet. Have you heard of him, Brinton? He was a Frenchman, but this is painted.
That's a sad country song, I think, in some places.
Circa 1918-19. So I think the story that I know about this is he painted this as a kind of a homage to the end of the war, into World War I. I guess he was sad, and he was kind of in his garden. He could hear the battle going on in the distance.
Absolutely. People during the war encouraged him to leave, but he refused to. He stayed in Giverny, and he could hear the battle going on in the distance.
In your exhibit, you had the Monet, the late years. I think this was one of the pieces.
Well, it was inspired by this painting. And so we have two Monets in the collection. We have an early Monet, in fact, the first painting that he exhibited at the Salon in Paris. And then we have this great late Monet, which is in a very different style. And so we decided several years ago to do two Monet exhibitions, one on early Monet, inspired by that early Monet that we have, and then the late Monet exhibition inspired by this painting. And, so yes, it was the inspiration.
We could talk all day about this guy. So the next piece, this one was your first acquisition, and quite possibly your biggest, because it really put you, I mean, forgive me for cheapening this, but it puts you on the map in a really big way because of what it is.
Which one do you think it is?
He already knows. The Torment of Saint Anthony. It was acquired in 2009, right after you got to the Kimbell. This is Michelangelo's, I think I'm saying this correctly, his first piece. He was age 12 or 13 when he painted it.
It was his first painting.
First painting, yes.
And it's showing FORTitude as well. Saint Anthony is.
Right.
The acquisition of this painting was one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me. I just couldn't believe that we were able to acquire this. This is the only painting by Michelangelo in the Americas. And it was his first painting. It's extremely well documented in the early sources. And that's why we know that it's Michelangelo. But I learned about this my second day on the job at the Kimbell. Went up to New York with our conservator, Claire Berry, met with the curators and conservator at the Met, and we ultimately were able to buy this. And it's just amazing.
How many years into the job at the Kimbell were you when you did this?
I learned about it my second day on the job, which was in March of 2009.
Are your headphones working, Brinton?
And then I kept thinking, it's just unbelievable.
I'm just trying to think of where you got this dream job that you wanted, and then this happens in such a short time frame.
It was. I couldn't believe it at the time. I thought I was going to get run over by a truck. I was just trying to put more
emphasis in the story.
I got you. I've seen this more than several times. It's a very small piece. It's almost, if you weren't looking for it, you'd have to stumble onto it, because if you don't, unless you didn't know, it's incredible how small it is, but how detailed it is. And just to stand in front of it, it's a goosebumper, right? I mean, it's
absolutely. And the thing is, before we bought it, it was a lost painting and a rediscovery. That's why we were able to I mean, it would have been in a museum hundreds of years ago if it had not been lost. And when we bought it, there was a divide among people who either believed that it was by Michelangelo and then some who did not. And it was sold and given an export license from England. And so in general, at the beginning, there was a divide between American art historians and English art historians. The English did not believe it. The Americans did. And then when it was cleaned and studied at the Met, changes, the detailed descriptions of the painting from the 16th century make us know that this painting either has to be the original or else a copy after the original. And then when it was cleaned and studied, changes that the artist made were all over the painting. And it became clear that this was not a copy after another work. And I remember asking Keith Christensen, the former chair of European paintings at the Met, he just retired last month, how sure he was that this is Michelangelo. He said, I'm absolutely 100% certain, but it'll take 20 years for there to be a consensus. And so when we first put the painting on view at the Met, because we wanted as many people to see it as possible, and more people would see it in New York initially than in Fort Worth, it was very nerve-wracking because you didn't know what the reaction would be, and it was enormously positive. It was given a one-painting exhibition at the Met, and it got a huge attendance that summer, the summer of 2009.
What did you get in return from the Met? Did you get a good...
The Met has been incredibly generous lenders to us. They always are. So they're close friends of the Kimbells. But then, so there were still some doubters about the attribution. I was so pleased, though, that most people believed it. The thing is, before we bought it, we tried to come up with every convincing argument against the attribution. And we couldn't come up with a single argument against it. And so, but I said to myself at the time, if we don't buy it and it ends up being Michelangelo, I'll regret it for the rest of my life, but it would be 100 times worse if we bought it and it ended up not being Michelangelo. But I was very pleased with the outcome. But then 6 years after we had bought the painting, this fantastic discovery was made. Underneath the surface of the painting, our conservator had seen for years these scribble marks underneath the paint surface. She had seen them in infrared images and x-rays, but she couldn't decipher what these scribble marks were. And then new technology has been invented, a new type of camera. It's called a hyperspectral camera. And John Delaney, this conservation scientist at the National Gallery of Art, he's the guru of this technology. There was
we have a videographer like that.
Well, he came out to the Kimbell and got better images of this doodle, basically. And it became clear what it was. It was a very quick compositional sketch. It couldn't have taken more than 15 or 20 seconds to do, but a very quick compositional sketch of this fresco in Florence in the Church of Santa Maria Novella. And that's the exact fresco that the artist Ghirlandaio's studio was said to be working on when Michelangelo in the Ghirlandaio studio was said to have painted this painting. And it couldn't be better. I mean, the attribution can't be questioned.
That is amazing.
You came up with the evidence that no one, not only did you get like all of these great events, but then to have the evidence,
But it also, it's amazing that we had the painting for 6 years and something as important as that we didn't know about until this new technology was created.
Well, because you knew in your heart it was the real thing. So you didn't have to prove it to anybody.
Yes, and it was, yes, and we knew it had to be. And but before we bought it, we were as critical as we possibly could be.
Yeah. So we, if you had to put a price on this, I know you can't talk price. What would this be worth on open market? Are we talking 30, 40, 50? Or is it much greater than that? 30, 40, 50 million?
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the price. Thanks very much, Eric.
Can you speak to that, or is that untouchable?
I will tell you the truth. I don't know what it would bring. There's nothing like this that has been sold.
Right.
I mean, Michelangelo paintings, quite frankly, are rarer than Leonardo's. There are 4 easel paintings by Michelangelo. Right. And he's one of the most important artists in the history of art.
Right. Well, unfortunately, we have to move on to the last piece. I know we could talk about the art in the Kimbell for days because there's plenty to speak of. We could only do 6 on the show, but the last piece is probably the most known piece that the Kimbell owns. Caravaggio, who's an Italian painter. This is the Cardsharps. Most people recognize this image, circa 1595, and I know it's one of the most important pieces in Western art.
J.W. and Brinton playing cards with Eric looking at J.W.'s cards.
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, this painting is an absolute landmark in the history of art. And this is the painting that we believe more or less established Caravaggio's reputation. He painted this when he was a fairly unknown painter working in Rome. And a major collector saw it in an art dealer's shop. He bought it, invited Caravaggio to live in his palazzo, and arranged for important commissions in churches in Rome. And Caravaggio was one of the most influential artists and best known artists working in Rome from that point on. And he created a new type of style that was, as I said, very influential. And so later artists like Rembrandt would not look like the Rembrandt we know today, if not for Caravaggio. Rembrandt may never have seen an actual painting by Caravaggio, but his style was transmitted to the Netherlands through followers of Caravaggio. So Caravaggio's style had a huge impact on Rembrandt and so many other artists. So, this is just such an important painting. And the story of its acquisition by the Kimbell is sort of like the Michelangelo story. We know because it was so famous after it was painted, it was copied dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And we know everything about the early history of the painting. We know which wall and which palazzo it was hanging on until the 1890s. And then the then owner sold it. And the city of Rome accused the seller of illegally exporting it. There was a trial, and the city of Rome ended up granting the export license under the condition that a number of paintings be given to Roman museums. And so that happened. The painting disappeared for almost 100 years. But every few years, a painting would show up, one of the copies, and it would be presented as the original, and they were always shot down until this painting appeared. And as I said, the 1980s. And the painting was shown to, I believe curators at the Met saw it. And I think that they thought at first that it was one of the copies. And I think curators at the Getty saw it and they thought it was one of the copies. And then it was shown to Ted Pillsbury at the Kimbell, who saw it with John Brealey, the conservator at the Met, and they thought that it was the original. And the Kimbell entered an agreement in which the Kimbell had first right of refusal, but would be allowed to clean it and study it, which is what happened. And then, like the Michelangelo, changes that the artist made appeared in the painting, indicating that it was the original. The smoking gun came when an old lining on the back of the canvas was removed, and the seal of Cardinal Del Monte, the documented original owner, was found on the back. And we always said that was the smoking gun. And with the Michelangelo, I said, the rediscovery of the Michelangelo is so much like the Caravaggio, but it lacked that smoking gun until that doodle was identified, right. And that's the smoking gun. So the Michelangelo.
Is it? I mean, this is, my mind's going to like watching a spaceship take off in the NASA control room, and you guys are all around here. I had no idea that there was this much kind of mystique and then competitiveness, clearly, because you have these museums almost not competing, but as you said, that the Getty passed it on in the Met, and then all of a sudden we get it here, and you've got guys that have said, no, we think it's the one, we can prove it. And then there you see the shuttle lifting off. I mean, that's got to be a great moment. Not only professionally, but in a personal sense too, right?
Well, it's so satisfying when something like this is proven to be right.
Mm-hmm.
And the Caravaggio, it's amazing that a painting that important could be acquired in the 1980s. But that's the thing about the Kimbell. When you walk around the Kimbell, it's unbelievable what the acquisition dates are. When the Kimbell opened in 1972, so many people said, well, it's too late to form a truly great collection. It's just too late for that. But the Kimbell has proven time and again that simply is not true. And the Kimbell has had incredible luck in what it's been able to acquire.
So we're leaving for Vegas this afternoon. Would you like to join us? Because I believe that
absolutely
it could be very fruitful.
Eric,
I'm going to have very good luck after appearing on the show, as you said.
Yes.
Everyone does.
Eric, we have enjoyed your time. Not quite yet, Brinton, but our last question we ask all of our guests.
Okay.
Besides any familiar affairs, wife, children, we know you have kids. You had kids at Trinity Valley where we both attended. But besides familiar affairs, what was the best day of your whole life?
Not family.
Not family at all. Everybody tries to bring it back around to some baptism or some kid getting married. But no family, and just the best day of your personal life.
When I learned I had the Kimbell job. So
what a great answer.
And you should get a big bonus for that. That is great.
Grateful to have you. The Kimbell's grateful. We love you. Thank you for being on the show, Mr. Eric Lee.
Thanks,
Eric.